Okay guys, so this is our second installation of the VEX parts videos. This one's all about structural parts. So for the most part, the thing that starts all of our structures is going to be screws. We have two different kinds. We use the 832 screws. They attach most of the structure parts except for the racks, and they attach all the V5 motors, and this is what they would look like when attached. These screws are attached to the metal parts as well as some of our plastic parts, and they need a Keps nut on the back end here to keep them on where they go. The Keps nut always has the teeth facing the metal. These get tightened with our 3/32 Allen wrenches. Then we have some 393 motors, which are also called servos. They require a smaller screw called a 632 screw. They are thinner and they have smaller heads than the 832s. These are tightened with a 564 Allen wrench, and they don't use Keps nuts. So differences between these two kinds of screws. Used on structure and parts is the 832, needs a Keps nut on the back to hold it, and it's used on the V5 motors. It's thicker and wider than the 632s. The 632s are used on special parts like racks. They're used on the 393 servo motors. They are thinner and they have a smaller head than the 832s. So you're going to ask, well, what's the difference in these drivers? So the 564s are these two longer Allen wrenches, and notice they have two ends. They have a long end and a short end, so it makes them sort of, I don't know, L-shaped. But the point being is that when they're long and thin like that, those are going to be your 5/64ths, and then the other ones are all 3/32. So the shorter, stubbier ones and the long T-handled ones are all 3/32. So we have a bunch of bearings, which are also super important to structure. Each time an axle goes through metal, there needs to be some sort of a bearing there to keep it from wobbling, make it steady. This is a flat bearing. You've also got lock bars down here, and you've got the pillow block bearings over here. Lock bars will actually force a piece of metal to turn with an axle because they're square in the middle. The axles are square, they go through, it's screwed into the metal. That thing will now turn with the axle. Whereas the pillow block bearings, the axle goes through the centerpiece, which is round, so it just basically supports the axle off of a structure. So the axle can sit here at a parallel, essentially, to a piece of structure. It's good for when you're using longer axles to keep them steady. So I'm going to scooch me actually off the screen for a second. If the part is not going to be under a lot of stress, you can use pop rivets, these guys right here. But the pop rivets only work in the flat bearings. They do not work with the pillow block or the lock bars, but they will work with flat bearings. You push them in from the metal side, and it will hold them into place. If you want to avoid using screws or you're trying to get something to go together really quickly, a lot of times those pop rivets can be really useful. So why do you need a bearing on each side of this? And again, I'm kind of moving myself out of the way here. So primarily, the axle has to be supported all the way across. So notice you've got one bearing here. It has screws holding it in place. The axle comes through, second bearing here. That's going to keep your axle from wobbling on either side of that metal, makes it super strong and a lot less likely to move, meaning your gears will stay lined up correctly the way they're supposed to. So that is all about bearings. Then we're going to talk about axles, which are these guys here. So rotary motion, I'm just going to scooch me. Rotary motion is translated using axles. They are also called shafts. When you read the official documentation, a lot of times they will be referred to as shafts. I like to call them axles because that's what we use them for, is to use them as axles. We have 1/2 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch, 6 inch, and 12 inch axles. The 5 and 6s we don't have a ton of. The 12s we do have quite a few. Don't use a 12-inch axle when you need a 4-inch axle. You will bend the long 12-inch axles. 12-inch axles are going to be like a foot. They're long, and 9 times out of 10 you don't need a 12-inch axle for whatever you're doing, and they are not drumsticks. We're not going to play with them. Axles are square so they can grip onto things that rotate. Then we also have standoffs, which are not axles, which is a little confusing to people. This is a standoff. Notice it's threaded. So standoffs are used to separate metal sheets. So you thread, put a screw through and hold it here, and then you put this one here. Think of it like there, like legs on a table. It would hold the table up off of something, or would hold two parts separate from each other at an even distance the entire way. You use 832 screws to attach those standoffs. Always use the shortest screws you can get away with. And the reason is the threading on the standoff does not go all the way through. It only goes a tiny amount. So if you're using a super long screw, you will run out of threads long before you ever get that screw actually butted up against the metal. So always use short screws with the standoffs, trust me. So sprockets and gears have weird inserts. First off, these are what the inserts look like. There are round ones and there are square ones. This set of sprockets here, one has a round insert and one has a square insert. The square insert allows that sprocket to turn with the axle. The round one allows it to turn free of the axle. So I just need this sprocket here and I need it to turn, but I don't need it to, grip an axle or do anything. I just want to sit there and spin when something else spins. Then I would use a round insert. They're pretty rare. 9 times out of 10, you're going to want these square inserts. This is what they look like with the axles in them. The square ones are grippy. The round ones will just turn. They don't grip anything. The sprocket with the round insert is independent. It does not grip the axle, so it just spins by itself. Now, the way we hold things onto axles are called shaft collars. Sometimes you need to fix something on there. We would normally use 2 kinds. The locking ones, which are what you're seeing right here, these locking shaft collars use a 5/64 Allen wrench to open and close them. The black set screws are what you're going to close when you screw it tight, righty tighty, lefty loosey. When you turn it right, it's going to tighten onto the axle. When you turn it left, it comes off. Don't over tighten these, because if you do, you're not getting them off. And then the axle and the shaft collar are both hosed. You gotta toss them, because there's no good way to get in there and get that set screw out once you strip it. So don't do that. Most of the time you will be able to use rubber shaft collars. They don't hold as well as a locking shaft collar, but if you're not putting a bunch of stress on that axle, it should be just fine. They are not spacers. In fact, these guys down here at the bottom, these are spacers. Spacers are plastic rounds with a hole in the center that allow the shaft to spin independent of them, and they just hold things separated from each other. So if you have 2 gears side by side that are supposed to be turning in parallel, you can put a spacer in between them. So notice here, this is how you would use a locking shaft collar. There's a locking shaft collar here holding a gear with the other gear lined up touching here so that it can spin. The reason there's locking shaft collars here is because there's a lot of torque. There's a lot of torque going on right there, and so a rubber shaft collar might move, whereas a locking shaft collar would not. So Sam does not understand what a shaft collar does. Explain it to her. So in general, we explain it as shaft collars lock onto a shaft so things like wheels and gears don't move along that shaft. they won't come off. So that's kind of our basic description. Now, these are called advanced mechanics parts. Notice there's a bunch of them. Rather than breaking them all up by their names, you'll see that most of these are, with the exception of these bevel gears, tend to all be together. So I'm just going to slide that up there and, oh, apparently I'm not. So gray support parts would be these guys here. They're all lumped together in a box that says literally gray support parts. They're used for different parts and different mechanisms for different things. When you go to build things, you will need different pieces for different things. We've also got motion parts. These are also put together all in the same box. This is a cam, this is a follower, that's a handle. There are other motion parts in there as well. Don't worry about it. When you need them, you'll see them. And finally, we have worm gears, which are these little guys here. This is a worm gear. These up here are lead screws. Notice the lead screws are longer than the worm gears. And when we get to building those parts, you'll see why they're that way. They are not in the same box. They are totally separate from each other so that you don't get confused. So now we're going to talk about some metal bars. First off, we've got, scooch that. We've got these angle bars that have only two sides, no ends on them. They look like a little L-shaped angle bracket, which is essentially what you use them for. Then you have chassis bars. Chassis bars have two sides. They have one on the side, and then they have a bottom piece, and then they have two ends with slots on them so that they can easily be maneuvered into making like the sides of a car, which is what a chassis is used for. We also have metal rails, which have three sides. They have two sides and a base, and you would go through them, run your axle through the sides usually. They're heavier and they tend to be very structurally sound. We have them in short, medium, and long sizes. Then you have slider bars like this guy. We have racks and slider parts that will slide inside of them, and two of the slider bars can actually connect and slide on each other. If you need something that slides back and forth for some reason, you would probably want a slider bar. They come in both long and short. So metal sheets. We got base plates. Base plates are heavy. They're bases. You do not put a base plate vertically. Trust me, it's going to be way bigger than what you need. It's going to be a pain in the butt to build around. So bases really set flat on a table, and then you build from the base up. C-channels. C-channels are good for putting on the side of a base plate. So you have your base plate along the bottom, and then you've got your C-channel. If what you're building needs to be really secure, or you have a lot of stuff that's all going to hang off of that C-channel. C-channels are also good for putting vertically because you can screw them into the side of the base plate and then have like a vertical piece for like a bridge or something that would hold on to things. We also have flat metal sheets that come in a lot of different lengths. This is a long one. And we also have the shorter ones that are half-sized, and then we have the little bitty square ones that are quarter sizes of this. They get used for all sorts of different things. If you're using two metal sheets touching each other, then probably what you should have used was a C-channel, because usually just one metal sheet should be used for any project. Two of them means that you're not doing something quite right, and you should probably investigate or ask for some help. So what parts do you see here? All right, so gray support parts. Yep, there they are. You're also going to see motion parts. The handle here is a motion part. This is a lead screw. These are sliders that go with the motion parts. That's your lead screw. You've got a slider bar, we talked about that, and your base plate. So those are all the parts you can see in the image. So next there is a section about gussets and specials. Gussets are small connector parts. They let you connect metal sheets at an angle, and that's what they look like. The idea here is that you would take a look at them. We have different kinds of gussets. They're really useful, but they do bend and break easily, so be careful not to bend them. We also have large winch boxes, which we normally just use with pulleys. And we also do have smaller winch boxes as well, but those are on a different spot. So there is a video, which I'm not going to play here because this is also a video, showing you how to do build basics. This is part of your assignment that you're going to watch, and it's going to walk you through the basics of how to put things together and what things go where. So good luck. This should get us, no, all the way through. We're going to start with brain and digital sensors on our next video.